Chapter 17, Fate Plays a Trick. It was nearly noon when Paintbrush trotted quickly up the last rocky bit of road that led through the narrow defile into Nakazari. Across the valley, the great works of the Nakazari Mining Company lay idle. There was not a sign of life about. The gay little plaza, washed green with the rainy season, was deserted, but the torn grass and the debris littering the place showed that an army had bivouacked there. The doors of the hotel were closed and locked, the gates barred. On the main door hung a placard ordering that the hotel and mine were to remain closed awaiting the return of the regiment. It was signed by the colonel. It was a bad place to stay around, and as Paintbrush had had his fill at the river, Raquel swung past the fountain and turned up the hill on which the officials of the company had built their residences. It looked like a California suburb on the hill-pretty bungalows, tennis courts, a rudimentary golf course. There were groves of citrus fruits. It was all very pretty. Raquel dismounted, took off Paintbrush's saddle and blanket so that he could roll on the grass, and then stretched herself beneath the trees. Here in this hidden spot, she and Paintbrush could rest without being seen. She slept and dreamed. She heard someone crying pitifully, in a heartbroken way. Could it be Mom? The thought jarred her into consciousness, and she leaped to her feet. But there was not a sound in this deserted place, except the faint yapping of some little cur dog from a far hillside, where the huts of the peon miners clung like swallows' nests. The drip of water from near one of the houses broke the stillness. Raquel stepped quietly over to where a pipe and faucet rose from the grass near a balcony. As she laid a hand upon the faucet, a door on the balcony before her opened, and a slight girlish figure stepped out. Speechless with amazement, they stood face to face for a moment, the girl on the balcony wavering slightly back and forth. Then with a moan, she tottered and fell forward. Raquel pulled open the screen door with a quick movement and reached the girl's side. She caught her before she could fall to the floor. It was Lois Wainwright. Thin and pale she was, but still lovely, though her closed eyes were red with weeping, and blue hollows smudged her cheeks. The shock of it almost stunned Raquel. Lois. How could she be here, of all places? Lois' eyelids began to flutter, and Raquel, lifting her in wiry arms, half carried, half dragged the limp figure out on the grass. She bathed the white face with fresh water from the faucet and fanned her briskly with a palmetto leaf. Lois' eyes opened slowly, almost reluctantly, and she sat up, looking hungrily into the face peering down at her. Raquel Daniels, she faltered. So it really is you. I was afraid to look again. I hardly dared believe it, and she turned her head away as tears rolled down her cheeks. Come, Lois, Raquel spoke quietly, patiently, as to a child. Come, dear, you mustn't cry. Tell me, is it possible that you are all alone here? Where is your father? Take me away, save me. Lois' eyes widened with terror. Papa is dead. He died suddenly. She could say no more. She was almost unstrung with strain, fright, and grief. A few babbling words about the Chino cook who had gone away with everything, and the Mexican boy who was coming back to take her off into the mountains roused Raquel to the necessity for getting away. Could she get Lois to El Escondido? How was it possible with one so weak and broken? Leading her gently back into the house, Raquel glanced about the attractive bungalow. How pleasant it would be to stay right here, if they only dared. But she herself must return to the ranch of the desert to find Georgie, and she couldn't leave Lois alone. No, Lois would have to go with her. But there was little food in the pantries. They had been looted. Doors were ajar, cupboards open. She found, however, in the places where it always occurs to womankind to look, whole wheat crackers, some cheese, and a box of guava paste. She threw them into a sack, leaving the tinned milk and seafoods, which were most likely to be spoiled. She dashed back to Lois, who, with frightened eyes, was hastily stuffing clothes and toilet articles into a suitcase. "You can't take that, Lois," Raquel spoke gently. "We have no way of carrying it, dear. I am going out now. While you put on some riding clothes, that linen suit would be best to see if I can't rout out a burro or a mule. To carry what we need unless I can find another horse for you to ride." "Quick, Lois." "We must be quick." Lois, with a swift obedience that was touching, and with a piteous reliance on Raquel, began at once to get into her things. She seemed afraid to speak aloud, but she did not want Raquel to leave her there alone for an instant. Don't go," she pleaded in a whisper. "Wait for me," Raquel helped her. They left the wardrobe full of lovely, flimsy frocks, the bureau drawers full of scented undergarments. Lois snatched her father's picture from the dressing table, and Raquel, on impulse, pushed the silver articles into the wardrobe and turned the key in the lock. It was a stalwart piece of furniture. The owners would be back someday, and might return the things if they had not been filched. In the corrals, they found not a horse nor even a burro. Nor did a quick survey of the hilltop discover a single animal. There was nothing to do but find some horse for Lois to ride. They could not get away without it. It was dangerous to stay where they were. The troops might be back at any moment. No one knew what treatment the girls might receive. They could not hope to hide here forever. Bandits looking for ransom were everywhere. What chance would there be for a fragile, lovely creature with golden hair like Lois? Raquel was frantic with the dilemma. She reasoned to herself, perhaps it's better at that to stay here. Here it's cool and comfortable. There's something to eat. Wouldn't it be better to take our chances so long as we're alive than to go out on the desert with only the pinto to carry the two of us, and water and food? Then she remembered the threatening placard on the hotel door. She thought of Georgie. It was a terrible decision, but they must go. She brought the pinto up to where Lois was waiting on the porch and spoke to him. She tied on the bag of food and put Lois' things in her saddle bag. Then she half lifted Lois on his back and took the bridle to reassure the horse, still wild at heart when anyone but his mistress came too near. On a last impulse, Raquel turned down the hill again toward the plaza, hoping to catch a glimpse of some stray horse. Perhaps some second-rate animal had been left behind, tied in a corral, or hobbled on the mountainside. As if in answer to prayer, she heard a nicker, and down at the end of the plaza, under a flaming paradise tree, she caught sight of a large roan horse, awkwardly jumping toward the fountain in the center of the square. His front feet were hobbled. She helped Lois off again and left her in the shelter of the trees. Then Raquel ran out and up to the animal. He was thoroughly manso and offered her his hind hoof for inspection. He had cast a shoe, but that was not what made him limp. A nail had become thrust into the tender part of the hoof, just enough to hurt when pressure was put upon it. Raquel pulled it out, and the friendly creature stretched out his head and wriggled his lips in appreciation. "And they left you behind for that, old boy." Raquel talked to him as she quickly untied the hobble ropes. Too lazy to find out what made him lame. Can you beat the ways of a peon with a horse? You were most certainly picked up over the border anyway, old boy. What a find just now, when I'd have given several kingdoms for a gentle horse. The brown horse still limped, but only slightly. There was no saddle, no blanket in sight. They could go by the bungalow again and pick up a blanket, and Raquel remembered a decrepit old saddle hanging in one of the stable sheds behind the house. Every minute seemed an age, yet it was only 10 minutes after they left Lois' house before they were back. And a few minutes later Raquel had the new horse nicely blanketed and saddled with the patched-up saddle, roping the cinch rings together. A rope bridle was rigged from the pieces with which the animal had been hobbled. With Lois mounted, they went quietly side by side down through the grapefruit grove, plucking a number of the big fruits as they passed. Behind the last house should be the trail which Raquel's host of the night before had described. She could not in the least remember what direction they had taken to Escondido before. Now she was too far to the right. Above the houses, the old woman had said, "Ah, there it was, a fair trail surely." And they were on it, winding over foothills in a northeasterly direction. All this while Lois remained silent, dazed. But as they dropped down into an arroyo, out of sight of the rest of the world, she whispered timidly, "Where are we going, Raquel?" "To a ranch called El Escondido, where I hope to find my brother Georgie, and where we can be very comfortable and safe. It's not far, and we'll rest by the river we are coming to, and eat something before we start across." It was very hot there in the sandhills, with no protection from the blazing sun. Before them, a peccary scuttled away with her drove of young. Lois' face was like the white flower of the Lilia de la Crucifixion. "Just a Cotch javelina, the wild pig of this country," Raquel reassured her. Pigs did not seem formidable to Lois, and she relaxed in her saddle. Raquel was glad that the fierce old sow had not seen fit to charge them, for a horse will run from a peccary. Over another hill still. But it was the last, and below them ran a sluggish, muddy stream, yellow and swollen with the rains. There were no trees along the river, only mesquite bushes, Spanish dagger and stunted palms. Lois was already exhausted, though they had ridden scarcely an hour, and Raquel felt as happy as a lizard in the sun. "How much farther?" Lois gasped. "Come, dear, try to pull yourself together." Raquel spoke sharply, for a glance at Lois showed her that she was letting go of what reserve force she had. Lois winced as if she had been struck, but closed her lips tightly and held desperately to the saddle horn. Raquel rode close and put an arm about her. They reached the sandy flats of the river bed, and Raquel leaped off, lifting Lois from her horse. Quickly, she sought the one large spot of shade beneath a maguey plant, and spiking the burlap sack and the saddle blankets from one thorn to another, contrived a nice bit of shade. She pulled out a clean shirt that Lois had given her and wet it in the stream, then hurried back to fan Lois. A slight breeze was stirring, and it was surprisingly cooler there in the shade by the river. In a little while, Raquel peeled an orange, making the girl eat it with a few wheat cakes. She herself then ate as much of the slender provender as she dared, and with good appetite, for she had breakfasted before 5 that morning. A little color was returning to Lois' lips. She lay back resting. Presently, she looked at Raquel with puzzled eyes. You act as though nothing had ever happened. I should think you'd hate me. I wouldn't have blamed you for leaving me there in that terrible place." At the thought, tears filled her eyes again. Lois was quite unnerved. What she must have been through, poor child. "There, you mustn't think of it," Raquel said soothingly. "Why, I wouldn't leave a horse to suffer, would I? Much less a person." Lois was silent, taking this in. And perhaps it had been on the tip of Raquel's tongue to say, "I'd better have left you there. This may be a hard trip," but she caught herself just in time and said instead, Probably you will feel better to get into new surroundings. Raquel had left her wrist watch at El Escondido on the night of their hasty flight, but Lois wore a delicate little toy on her own wrist, and it now started bravely ticking when Raquel wound it and set it at 2 o'clock, which she judged by the sun was the correct time. Raquel hung wet cloths on the bushes above Lois, head to create a bit of moisture in that fearful dryness, while the horses flicked their tails contentedly near, backed into the coolness of the mesquite leaves. Presently the girls slept. The shadows grew longer, and the little watch said 6:30 when they gradually roused. Lois' face was flushed, and she seemed scarcely able to shake off the stupor and heat languor which possessed her. Raquel bathed her face in the stream, which was running clearer now, and freeing the horses she led them down to water. The bank seemed firm, without any quicksands near. Paintbrush was vastly at home, and, as the air cooled, was playful as a colt. He rolled his pretty, silky back over and over in the water. "You wouldn't think of running off from me and playing me a trick, old boy, would you?" Raquel said to him. "I'll not take any chances with the call of the wild," she thought, and staked Paintbrush with the length of her Rita nearby. The big horse stood gratefully in the water, but seemed unused to open country. "I knew you were stable-bred, old feller, you," Raquel told him. "Now don't get caught in the quicksands." "Are you just talking to the horses, Raquel?" Lois asked, weakly. "Of course," laughed Raquel. "Come down here, Lois, can't you? And we can take a bath here in the river that will refresh us for the ride this evening." "Oh, Raquel," Lois gasped in dismay. "I couldn't ride another step today." "Oh, I can't. You'll feel better when you have had a bath and some food," Raquel answered reassuringly. After they had bathed and slipped on their freshened clothes, they felt much better. Lois let down her long hair and brushed it out. In the rich light of the setting sun, it looked like a web of purest gold. But her thin skin was cracked and blistered from the unaccustomed exposure, while Raquel's face was like velvet, well-nourished from within. Raquel remembered a tiny bottle of olive oil in her saddle bag, and she had Lois rub some over her lips and face. She went off into the desert a little way and came back with a small bundle of amole root. "I pulled this out," she said, "and will put a bit in water. You try it and see how soft it is. It's soapweed, you know, and better than any soap I ever saw." She lined a little hollow in the earth with stones that were hot from the sun, and in a few moments there was a basin of foamy water. Lois bathed her hands gratefully. "Oh, it's like velvet." They ate sandwiches of crackers and cheese and guava paste. Lois ate with effort, although the first food she had eaten in days, she said, was what Raquel had given her that day. "There was no one to fix it," she explained. "You've got to get over that," Raquel remarked dryly. "If we should get separated, I don't aim to come back and find you all in with starvation because you are too proud, or too lazy, or something, to fix yourself something to eat." "Separated?" Lois exclaimed. "Don't leave me a minute, Raquel." Lois was not angry at the rebuke, only surprised at the idea of getting food for herself. "I didn't feel like eating," she excused herself. "I've never ridden very far before." "Couldn't we stay here tonight?" Raquel said nothing for a moment, then answered sternly. "Lois, we can't stop at a good hotel till we feel like going on." "There's no choice. We've got to go now. I've got to get back to my mother and take her son back to her. That's the least I can do. She's back home, not knowing what has become of me and my kid brother. Her husband and other sons are at war. She's alone. We haven't enough food or fresh water to last another day. Another hot day in the desert would mean, well, we can't do it. And without another word, she got up and saddled the horses methodically, for the sun had already set and a baby moon was far up in the sky. In silence, she helped Lois to her feet and upon the horse's back, then quickly mounted Paintbrush and made for the narrowest part of the widespread stream. The Pinto examined the bottom carefully, withdrew from two places that he did not like, and finally picked the widest part of the meandering river as his choice for fording. The big horse followed obediently in the Pinto's every footstep, which was a good thing, for he would not lead on a rope. Raquel had already tried that and found he pulled back. When they were nearly across, Raquel looked back to see if Lois was all right. She was clinging with one hand to the pommel, while the other was thrown back over her tightly closed eyes. Her face was white as death. Raquel would have gone to her side, but the crossing was fraught with too much possible danger to take her attention from it for an instant. The soluble, slippery, red soil, the shifting sand of that country, is too treacherous ever to rely upon. Suddenly, in the center of the stream, the Pinto sank down above his flanks, rose up with a fine effort of splendid muscles, and, bounding clear of the bottom, began to swim toward the main current. In a moment, he was shaking himself nonchalantly on a firm bit of beach. But Lois, horse stood up to his knees on the far side, refusing to budge. So Raquel had to put Paintbrush across again, which she did easily a bit further up. Lois was transferred to his back, and he seemed to realize that he must carry her safely across. Raquel had no trouble in guiding the big brown, though he floundered dangerously for a few minutes. Ahead of her, the Pinto swam with Lois bent over the saddle, and then he leaped violently clear of the shaky sands beneath him. Raquel's heart was in her mouth for fear that Lois, wavering in the saddle, would fall off. But they came through safely and mounted the long dune opposite the river to see a sandy desert stretching before them, rosy in the setting sun. "Raquel, Raquel," begged Lois. "Let me get off. I can't do these things." "Oh, leave me behind then, if you must go on." "I'd rather die. Lois." "Hush," Raquel spoke sternly. "You can do it. You did do it already, and it is easy riding now across the desert," she added, relenting. As the Pinto was too quick in movement for Lois, Raquel changed back to her own compadre. The stars were out. The night had fallen as softly and quietly as a velvet leaf. The little moon rode higher and higher. Behind them, the dark vegetation along the river served as a guide to Raquel, and ahead were two dark spots that she tried to keep in position. "Raquel," Lois said after a while, "please talk to me." "Are we to ride all night?" "Oh, I was thinking," Raquel answered contritely. "I was thinking about Georgie, my brother. I don't know where he is. I hope he'll be at El Escondido when we get there." "Why, no, Lois. We don't need to ride all night, my dear, but we must get nearly across this mesa tonight." "Yes, I know you must be worried about your brother," Lois faltered. "I am too." Raquel was touched, for she had never had a considerate thought from Lois before. She began to feel the charm, which Lois had always had for the girls at school. You couldn't expect such a girl to stand any hardship, after all, brought up as she had been. Now Anne would probably stand the iron like a good one. Raquel laughed aloud. "I haven't thought of school for a mighty long time now, I can tell you," she said. "But I thought of it just then. Wouldn't they be surprised, back there, at us being together like this? I mean, way off down here." So they rode, talking of one thing and another. School inconsequential things that did not really enter into the drama of their own lives. But at length, the story of Lois and her father came out, bit by bit. After spending the winter in California, her father had suddenly decided, Lois said, to return to El Paso. But he stopped off at Douglas, Arizona, with the sudden idea of going on down to the mine at Nakazari. That was in April. His physician had told him that the climate would be ideal. He craved dryness and warmth. He was a large stockholder in the company and a close friend of two of the high officials of the mining company at Nakazari. A few telegrams were sent, and down they came. It was very comfortable for the first 2 months, and there was a nice young engineer with whom Lois played tennis and croquet. Her father seemed very happy and breathed much more easily than he had in the foggy climate of California. Then in May, everyone else went back north to avoid the heat, but her father would stay. And all at once, this new revolutionary disturbance burst out again, and the troops came down into that part of Sonora. And then suddenly, oh, so suddenly, her father died. The Mexicans had buried him up there, on the hillside, and she couldn't telegraph anybody because all of the wires had been cut by the Mexican general. She had waited for the officials to come back, and she had written letters, including one to her cousin Jimmy, and given them to some Mexicans who said they would mail them. Then the Chinese cook ran away. He was always so frightened that he would hide when he heard a shot. And the Mexican boy had gone and taken everything, and the little girl who had been her maid did not come any more to wait on her. "What did you do when the army came into town the day before yesterday?" asked Raquel. "I hid all the time," sobbed Lois, "in the cooling cellar. But I had to come out for water, and everything was quiet. That was when I saw you. I thought you were just a Mexican boy at first, but I could never forget your face. And then it was you." She ended on a gulp of intense relief. The big brown horse began to limp. Raquel looked at Lois, watched by the light of the moon. It was after 12, clear and beautiful. They had been riding for 4 hours. They must have come at least 12 miles, perhaps 14, she judged. Yet about them stretched only the silvery desert. The old woman had had the usual native's idea of distances. Looking back the way they had come, there was nothing to be seen, and ahead of them the 2 dark spots had grown steadily larger. They were apparently 2 rocky foothills thrusting into the desert. If they could make that spot tonight, Raquel thought, then by daylight she could see where they were. Lois did not ask again to stop. She did not speak at all. 2 hours more of silent riding passed before they stood in the shadow of a hill at the foot of which the sands of the desert washed like the sea. There they stopped. Raquel dismounted and spoke to Lois, who was sitting drooped in the saddle with bent head. She was past speaking, her eyes closed. "Asleep in her saddle, poor kid," breathed Raquel. Lois slipped gently into Raquel's arms and was carried to a soft spot where she lay without so much as stirring. Raquel leaned over and listened for a moment to the quiet breathing. Then she lay down close to her charge and fell asleep, while the pinto drooped his head above his mistress. It was nearly 7 when Raquel waked and looked about. She saw that these sentinels in the desert were not real foothills. No little water courses wound their way among the crevices. The horses would have to go dry for a while, though Raquel could scarcely bear not giving the pinto a sip from the canteens. They did not seem to mind it, however, and after all they had drunk their fill last night. From the top of the hill, she saw far off to the east a valley of trees, in the center of which she knew El Escondido must lie, for behind them rose the foothills, just as she remembered them from that night. Only 3 weeks before, less than that. But she had lost count of the exact number of days that had passed since then. She came down and found Lois awake. Lois, when I have made this grass and wood catch fire, I'll give you the best breakfast you ever had, she promised cheerily. The fire caught from her burning glass. She made a little stove of stones about it and produced from the saddle bags a tiny frying pan, into which she poured a bit of the oil. From her pockets, she took 4 good-sized, mottled brown eggs and broke them into the pan. A ground bird of some sort laid them. I know they're good, laughed Raquel. They were delicious and satisfying, making a good meal with crackers and water. It was still cool on the desert when they rode away over the sands at a pace that brought them by 9 o'clock to the end of the desert, where a road led away toward the east. There the sands lost themselves in a growth of stunted shrubbery that rose into a higher vegetation the farther they went. But the day grew hotter and hotter, and the brown horse limped more and more. I'm afraid his foot is infected, Raquel thought. At last the animal stopped and would go no farther. Lois was herself exhausted, wilted by the heat. The girls dismounted. Raquel took the saddle off the brown horse, poured some of the precious oil in his foot, bound it so that flies could not get at it, and left him there. He absolutely would not be led another step. I'll send back for you tomorrow, old boy, if I can. You can make out without water until then. She put Lois on the pinto, who by now had become somewhat accustomed to her, and walked by their side over the heavy sand. Lois looked down at Raquel, trudging stoutly along and every now, and then throwing out a cheerful word. Lois tried to speak, but tears choked her, and she only shook her head and bit her lips. Raquel herself was frightened. Dear heaven! Were they lost? Just keep your head, keep your nerve, raky old girl, she said to herself. Her feet were growing tired. She was not used to walking any great distance. The cowhide sandals that she had exchanged for her boots when she escaped from the mine were not stout enough to protect tender feet from stone bruises or from the blistering heat of the road. In spite of her indifference to fatigue, the pain of her swelling, burning feet became insistent, unbearable. They stopped again to rest, but when she walked on a bit farther, the discomfort was as great as before. Lois, dear, I guess I'll get up behind you and let the pinto give us both a lift for a while. Paintbrush had never carried a double burden before and shied a bit at first, but at Raquel's soothing command trotted obediently ahead. But his pace grew slower and slower under the increased load, and his tender-hearted mistress felt she was asking too much of the faithful animal. So she slipped from his back again when they had gone less than half a mile, and as her foot touched the ground, an excruciating pain shot through it. She had stepped on a cactus thorn, which had gone right through the tough hide sole of the tegua, and embedded itself in the sole of her foot. At her involuntary cry, Paintbrush stopped dead and turned a startled eye upon his mistress. Lois clambered off his back and ran to Raquel. Oh, my dear, what have you done? Oh, your poor foot. Raquel was trying to pull the thorn out through the sole of the sandal. She could not remove the sandal without breaking the thorn off in her foot, when the flesh would close tightly around it. She explained this to Lois, and they both tried in turn to loosen the incredible spike. But they could not draw it through the tough hide of the tegua, and at length had to break it, and Raquel took off the sandal. Her blunt fingernails could not fasten on the stub of the thorn that remained in her foot, but Lois' long, pointed nails managed to grasp it before it could become completely embedded. Try as she would, however, Lois could not extract the thorn, and finally she took Raquel's poor swollen foot in her hands, and placing her mouth over the slowly bleeding wound, she drew the thorn out with her sharp little teeth. The pain for a moment made Raquel's eyes dim like a hurt deer, S. Lois was tearing her handkerchief into strips, for there was a rush of blood as the spike came out. When she had bound the wound as deftly as any nurse, she helped Raquel to the side of the road where there was shade under a flowering tree. It was impossible to go on. The heat was terrific, and Raquel could not walk. "We'll wait till sundown," Raquel decided. "Lois, what would I have done if you hadn't been so smart getting out that thorn?" Paintbrush, glad of a chance to rest, browsed quietly on mesquite leaves and the tender green of a strange plant they did not know. Raquel drowsed, for the pain had taken her strength and left her sleepy. When she woke after a while, she sent Lois out to forage for prickly pear. Tunas, the Mexicans call them, and told her how to knock the fruit off with a stick. Lois came back with her hat full, and the juicy, sweet fruit allayed their thirst wonderfully and refreshed them somewhat. But there were no crackers left in the saddle bags, and hunger pains gnawed them. Rabbits were hopping about curiously, and Raquel asked Lois to get her automatic from the bottom of one of the bags. There were, fortunately, a few cartridges left. Raquel shot a foolish young cottontail from where she lay. Lois winced at the sound of the shot, but she went over and picked up the rabbit, quivering as she laid it beside Raquel. She gathered moss and sticks and held the burning glass over the heap until it caught fire. While Raquel skinned the rabbit, Lois gathered more fuel. They cooked it at once, and almost starving, could hardly wait to snatch the pieces from the pan. Never had they been so close to stark hunger. A faint color came into Lois' cheeks as she ate almost greedily. The two girls finished the rabbit and took a sip from the canteen. "My goodness," said Lois, "look, we've eaten a whole rabbit." Raquel smiled. Lois was coming on. Indeed, a new spirit seemed to have come over her. "Food certainly makes a difference, doesn't it?" She sighed contentedly as she lay back against the bank at Raquel's side. "Let's start on right away." It's getting cooler, but her voice was drowsy. Raquel's eyes were closed. She did not answer, and Lois fell silent. When night came over the desert, it found them both asleep and covered them with its soothing mantle of darkness. They did not ride that night, though the pinto drooped patiently near and finally lay down in his saddle, a thing he had never done before. It was the piercing bright ray of the morning sun that sent a shaft of recollection to Raquel's sleeping brain. She sat up, startled, and called the pinto a trifle wildly. He came running, neighing gratefully. The girls never knew it, but he had had business with a rattlesnake just a few paces away, and his lightning hoofs had left a mangled thing for the coyotes to turn away from. He nickered at Raquel's call. Lois did not stir from her deep sleep. Raquel hated to wake her, but there was no choice, and she shook her insistently. Lois sat up quickly. When she was fully awake, Raquel talked over plans for continuing the journey. These were complicated by her swollen foot. She knew she could not endure the pain of walking. "I'll walk," Lois insisted. "You know, Raquel, it's much easier for me to walk than ride." "I'm used to walking, truly I am." Raquel agreed because really there was nothing else to do. Lois gathered some more cactus fruit. They ate these, drank the last of the water from the canteen, and set out, Lois trudging along so bravely that Raquel did not suspect what an effort it was for her to keep pace with Paintbrush's steady gait. It must have been past 10:30 when, after 2 hours or more, they struck a hard road. The path from the desert joined it abruptly. As they turned into it, Raquel looked up and down it and recognized with relief that this was the way she and Georgie had come before, when they were guided by the mine foreman. Fortune was with them, for Raquel knew she could never have found the road again except by stumbling on it as she had. Her spirits rose immeasurably, and Lois, too, when Raquel told her that they were now on familiar ground. Paintbrush also sensed that they were nearing their goal. Perhaps he knew, for he was almost frisky when the little party halted, and Lois somewhat awkwardly uncinched him and pulled off his saddle and blankets with willing but clumsy hands. "You will not have to walk any more, Lois dear," Raquel said. "Paintbrush will carry us both the last 3 miles to El Escondido." They rested a full hour, for Lois was not so hardy a walker as she liked to believe. Then the 2 girls saddled the Pinto again, Lois lifting on the heavy saddle and buckling the cinches with much effort after Raquel had smoothed the blanket. Lois climbed to the saddle, with the aid of Raquel's boosting, and Raquel pulled herself on behind. Thus it was they covered the last blistering miles. All at once they were there. A lovely paradise opened before them. They rode through the grove, before the front of the hacienda. A windmill was lazily pumping water that overflowed tanks and troughs, and slipped clear and brimming through the acequias, the irrigation ditches that nourished the fields of El Escondido. On through the arched gateway to the courtyard, where there was a strange silence and not a sign of life. Raquel called. There was a flash of a bright skirt, and a young Mexican girl appeared from the hacienda. "Conca," cried Raquel, "don't you remember me?" "It is Raquel Daniels." She pronounced it in the Spanish way, Danielle, with the accent on the last syllable. Conca hurried forward, smiling with relief. But indeed, she did well remember El Señorito. So he had escaped safely. That was good. No, she shook her head commiseratingly. The little brother had not returned. Raquel's heart sank. He must be with the army. He must, and Don Nestor, she inquired. How was he? And where were all of the Servients? Don Nestor was ill, Conca recited. He had been ill nearly 3 weeks ever since the night of the raid, and was still lying in the basement where he had taken refuge. He could not himself walk up the escalera, and who was she, Conca, to carry him? Indeed, El Padron had shouted at her with terrible wrath when she had offered to push from behind. P-Dad was cooking for them, but then El Señorito remembered how fat was P-Dad. He could scarcely move himself further than the kitchen door, and was of no assistance in the dilemma. All the others had departed. Manuel had not returned after that night. Conca always had suspected Manuel anyway, and that hussy Madalna, who had disappeared too. Worst of all, her novio, Conca's novio, whom she was to wed next month, had been seized by the troops and carried off, she knew not where. Conca's tongue was all for running on, but Raquel interrupted with the request that a room be made ready at once for the señorita with her. The one she herself had had before, Raquel suggested. Conca disappeared round a corner of the house, and in a moment was heard unbarring the strong front door from within. The girls stepped into the cool dimness of the zaguán and passed through into the patio. Raquel caught Lois by the arm for, now that they had arrived at their refuge, she gave signs of collapsing. With Conca's aid, Raquel got Lois upstairs and to the high white bed. Her face was pinched with fatigue and gray. Her blonde hair hung in dry and brittle wisps about her face. She was covered with dust. This was not the delicately lovely Lois Raquel had known, and her heart was touched with pity as well as concern. Conca VC, she faints. Get me quickly some water, some wine if there is any still, and tell Don Nestor I will be there at once as soon as I have attended my friend. Conca clattered down the stairs, and Raquel slapped water upon Lois, temples and wrists. Her own sore foot was forgotten. It was the second time Lois had fainted, and Raquel was not accustomed to such things. She pulled off the poor child's boots and laid her head on the soft pillow. When Lois had a few sips of the wine that Kanka brought, she revived. "So sorry I'm such a bother, Raquel," she said weakly. "Perhaps I can do better from now on." "Hush, dear." Raquel, who had never been demonstrative, even with Mom, whom she loved so dearly and loyally, took this girl in her arms as if she had been a sister. "You are going to be all right." And she knew that the last bit of hurt and hatred had melted away. "I must go down to the old Don Nestor, who is ill in the cellar of his house," she explained to Lois then. "Kanka will stay right here, and I'll be back as soon as I can." Then she slipped out, though her foot was still burning and swollen, not stopping even to wipe her face, but only to take a deep draught from the stone water jar hanging in the shade of the Galleria. Down in the wine cellar, which had but a single window high up, a barred affair opening on some hidden inner court, lay Don Nestor on a freshly made pallet. Raquel spoke to him from the trapdoor above. "It is I, Raquella," she said. "I have returned safely, Don Nestor." "Gracias a Dios," replied a fervent voice from below. "Come down at once, my child. I have worried terribly about you. That I could have sent you off with that rascal Manuel, whom I trusted so. I have lain here worrying. Had anything happened to you, I could never have forgiven myself." He seized her hand as, stepping from the ladder-like stairs, she limped towards his cot. "Myself, it is nothing. We will speak of that later." But the lad... Questions flew back and forth as Don Nestor heard from Raquel her experiences of that night, of her subsequent adventures, and the finding of Lois. Always, in spite of herself, Raquel returned to the fact that it had been agreed between Georgie and herself that they would make their way back to El Escondido if they became separated. She was near tears at not finding Georgie there. But there is no occasion yet to despair, for the muchachito would undoubtedly be obliged to stay with the soldiers for a while. "But I am sure they would not harm him," Don Nestor reassured her. He listened with interest to the account of their experiences with Manuel, upon whose head he invoked frequent holy imprecations. It was Manuel, he told Raquel, in detailing his own experiences with the soldiers, who had brought about the raid. Manuel was not, it had transpired with the discovery of his perfidy, an honest man at all. He was a rebel bandit who had fled Chihuahua 2 years before and sought refuge in Sonora. He had taken Don Nestor in completely. While he attended the affairs of El Escondido, he maintained contacts with other miserable fugitives in the hills and fomented trouble among the contented natives. News of his agitations had reached the governor, and it was to arrest him that the troops had come. After their first anger at the discovery that Manuel had flown, the troops had not molested El Escondido. He knew these things from Kanka and old Pedad, Don Nestor explained. They had conversed with him daily from the top of the escalera. Zil. It was his wretched ankle, dear señorita, which he had broken in his hurried descent into this Sotterreno that terrible night. True, he had been somewhat ill with the shock and the excitement, for he was no longer a young man, and it was impossible for him to ascend the ladder with this useless foot. Kanka had explained to the lieutenant that the padron could not see him. Raquel could imagine the dignity which sustained Don Nestor even under the trying circumstances of being detained in his wine cellar. And the soldiers had departed with apologies, profuse apologies, taking with them that fellow Jose, Kanka's novio, but none of Don Nestor's good wine, gracias a Dios. Don Nestor had set his ankle himself the next day, and it was nearly well now. But he would run no risks and would not ascend, only to fall back and break it again. The soldiers had not returned, and he felt that now that Miss Raquel was back with another young lady, he would attempt to go up to the upper chambers again. The gentle old caballero made a gallant effort to rise, but he was weakened by the pain in his injured foot, and his face grew white. "Oh, senor, do not molest yourself, I beg of you," Raquel implored. "We must arrange to get you upstairs at once, for you are very weak and cannot gain strength down here in this air. It is unthinkable. I shall go to arrange it now." The old gentleman lay back gratefully. Presently, the change was accomplished. Raquel and Conca found a high stepladder which they inclined against the perpendicular stairs that led from the wine cellar, thus making an easy ascent possible. With Conca on one side and Raquel on the other, Don Nestor, his ankle bound straight and stiff, at length climbed to the top where he all but collapsed on the floor. Then he would not move until Raquel had brought up the chest that he had kept beneath his cot all this time. The girls got him into a chair, and thus they drew him to the door of his bedroom, which was on the same floor, not far away. Conca had not even made the bed. Things were just as they had been on the night of the raid, because El Padron was very particular, and did not wish his possessions touched without orders, she explained volubly. Raquel helped her to lay the bed fresh and smooth, and to assist Don Nestor, weak and white, in the light of day to get in. "Put my treasure chest under my bed," he directed, smiling whimsically. "It is many years since I have had a charming woman to think of me and offer me her services. It is many years since my wife died-end my baby daughter." Don Nestor was deeply affected, and Raquel patted his hand tenderly. "You must go now, my dear, and have rest," he commanded. "What? No luncheon yet?" "Not even a refresco, Conca." "Ah, what a place." And he became at once so agitated and irascible that Raquel left, promising to eat something at once and to lie down immediately. Pedad already had arranged a table in a cool corner of the gallery, under a honeysuckle vine. Raquel ate the food as in a dream. She had come at length, almost to the end of her own resources. She was no longer conscious of her burning foot. She scarcely knew she was ascending the stairs to her room and then nothing. Conca undressed the limp, boyish figure on the bedbutt, of course. She had known that the señorito was a girl and tucked her sympathetically under the cool sheet, while she went across to the room opposite to see if that other pobrecito, so white-faced, was still asleep. Chapter 18, The Magic Flame. It was many days before either Lois or Don Nestor left their beds. Raquel recovered almost at once, although she still limped, but it was fortunate that the two invalids kept her in the house, for it gave her lame foot a chance to heal. Lois lay listlessly in bed, not seeming to care much about anything. She made no trouble, asked for nothing, ate without appetite what was placed before her. Raquel could not understand it, and was worried at Lois' indifference. She had seemed like another girl that last day in the desert. Truth to tell, Lois was recovering from shock, and kindly nature had merely employed a beneficent anesthesia to give her an opportunity to do so. While she gathered strength, Raquel talked with their host, diverting him from his pain and boredom, so that at the end of the fourth day he was out on the gallery, the ankle almost well. Raquel recounted to him, in detail, the incidents of her escape. At the story of the dance at Moctezuma, he was highly elated, and when she had finished, he said, "Señorita, I have been wanting to ask you to do me the favor to wear for me the costume of the ladies of Andalusia." In my room is a large chest of handsome clothing. It was my wife's. It is yours if you will accept it, and the jewels that go with the gowns. He smiled, a fine, sweet smile, extending his hand deferentially toward her. I'd love to put them on, Don Nestor, cried Raquel, rising. And I know it will be more pleasant to you than seeing me in these riding clothes. She still wore the extra linen suit which Lois had brought. I'll go now, she said, and come back for refrescos here. The old gentleman leaned back musing, a blue-veined hand over his kindly eyes. In the scented twilight of late summer they sat al fresco, the old caballero of Mexico and the señorita of old Spain. In white lace mantilla, made creamy by the years, and softest silk, gay-flowered, one would hardly have known our hard-riding Raquel. From her small white ears hung earrings heavy with rubies and wrought gold. Round her throat and wrists rich rubies and pearls gleamed. And I would like you to take up over the frontera with you to your rancho as many head of cattle as we can find vaqueros to drive. Don Nestor was speaking. It is little enough, querida señorita, after what you have suffered at my hands, through my mistake. There is no question of money. I have more than I shall ever use. I need none here. I am happy, drowsing away my life with memories, away from the world. He nodded gently. But Don Nestor, no. I couldn't accept that. I will be partners with you, though, if you like. Then, why not let it be a gift for the Allies? Suggested Don Nestor. I have great sympathy for them. I should like to be of a little service to the world. Come, let us say that we are partners then, he acceded. Your coming, my dear young friend, has been the one bright spot in many years. It has been very lonely at times. I wish that I might keep you here, but I know that may not be. Sometimes, he was interrupted by the sound of hammering at the front gate, followed by Conca's running to answer. Conca returned quietly and, standing behind Don Nestor's chair, beckoned Raquel. In the outer court, she found a dusty peon, who regarded her with amazement. But it was a boy, he objected, to whom I was directed to give this note. And I was also promised that I would receive another peso duro silver dollar for my trip. Where is Señor Daniel? But Raquel had seized the note he held in his hand and was reading. Reiki, come get me. I've tried 5 times to run away from this darn army, and they always drag me back. My horse is here, too. Give the man $1 if you see him. Signed, Georgie, P.S. We're just above Nakazari. I'll have to go, Raquel could have shouted. It's from Georgie. He's found. I must start tonight, right away. And perhaps we can get back by tomorrow night the next day anyway. The man had left with the note that morning, after 10 o'clock, he said, and he was here already. Georgie had given him a silver dollar to carry the message, and said his sister would give him more still if he would guide her back to him. Fine, Raquel agreed and hurried away to get ready, having first excused herself to her host. Don Nestor must not know of her going. He would be distressed and might object. But she must go at once. Paintbrush was saddled, and the big brown horse which she had herself recovered from the bush a few days before. His foot seemed to have completely healed, and she saw that this would be a good opportunity to return him to the regiment, and would furnish an excuse for her visit. Back again, she rode over the weary miles, only now the way was easier, with a hard road and the peon to guide her. He was a vaquero, he said, and she promised him work at El Escondido if he wished to return with them. Early in the morning, they neared Nakazari. Raquel had not yet determined what she must do in order to get Georgie away. Down the valley, she could hear a trumpeter. The regiment was in the town. She rode bravely into the plaza, which was filled with soldiers. No sign of Georgie, but he'd soon spot the pinto, all right. Straight up to the hotel she rode, dismounted, throwing the reins to her attendant, and strode into the dining room. At a table sat the colonel at breakfast, with his aides and lieutenant. He glanced in surprise at the youngster, who intruded so rashly. "Pardon, Coronel," Raquel swept her sombrero in salute. "Does this roan gelding I have outside belong by chance to you?" "He was found near my rancho, lame, with an infected foot, which I have cured." The coronel looked annoyed, but before he could speak, one of the aides replied, "The coronel cannot be bothered. He has not yet had his coffee. But I will go out and see the horse." There was a roan horse belonging to El General left behind a week or two ago, and he was much annoyed. The coronel was looking at Raquel aggrievedly. "I have not yet had my coffee," he complained. "Water boils slowly at this altitude," Raquel sympathized. "You talk like a native," snapped the coronel. "You mean everyone moves slowly at this altitude." "You don't look like a native, though," he added. "I have spent much time in the States," Raquel replied. "I only returned indeed a few months ago." "Is that so?" The coronel was mildly interested. "I myself went to school in California as a youth." "Won't you sit down and have breakfast with us?" "That is, if we ever get it. We have been waiting 3/4 of an hour for that dastardly cocinero to boil water for us." "I die for my coffee," he exploded with fresh wrath. "You want coffee?" asked Raquel. What a question. Then a brilliant idea occurred to her, though just how brilliant it was she did not at the moment realize. "I can give you an excellent cup in a moment, I think." "Excuse me an instant, sir," and she dashed from the room. She had remembered the 3 little tins that through all her adventures had lain in the bottom of her saddle bag, Mom's contribution. Would they still be there? Would the sterno be any good, or would it have evaporated or melted in all the heat through which they had passed? At any rate, the coffee would keep perfectly. Just outside the door, she stumbled over Georgie. His blessed, freckled face, his wide-toothed grin. Raquel's chin quivered ridiculously. "Buenos dias, senor." "Como la va, don't you know me?" Georgie inquired anxiously, for Raquel was standing there, looking at him sternly. "Shut up," she said. Then loudly, "Well, I'll dient the tooth." "Well, I'll have to get the coronel to let me take you home with me, young runaway." "Here, stay by my horse." With trembling fingers, she searched into the depths of her bag, and sure enough, there they were, the 3 little tins. Georgie had followed, and was standing at her elbow. "Raquel," he whispered. Georgie, huskily. "Wait." A few moments later, she was back at the table where the sterno was set up. Opening a can with a stout table knife, she touched a match to it. The fluid flickered, flared, then settled down to burn with a lovely blue flame. She set a little tin of water over it. The coronel was enchanted. And as the water grew warm, steamed, boiled, all under his rapt gaze, and as the boy put a coffee powder into a cup, he began to gesticulate wildly. For in a moment here was a cup of steaming coffee, its unmistakable fragrance warming the heart. He snatched the cup and drained the scalding drink. "More," he sighed, handing it back to Raquel. "It is delicious," as indeed it was. "What may I give you in exchange for that little apparato, my lad?" beamed the coronel after his 3rd cup of coffee. All his irritability vanished. "It is yours, coronel," Raquel replied. "All I want is a runaway youngster who belongs to our hacienda, but who I see has joined your company. I'd like to take him back with me." "By all means," assented the coronel, beaming in the possession of this new toy, this delightful tin stove. Apparently, it did not occur to him that it would ever burn out, which would always give him coffee. "Unless it is the amusing and indispensable infant called Tooth. Him I can part with for no one." "Alas, it is he, none other," replied Raquel, grinning with apparent amusement. "Oh, well then, if he belongs at your place. Go with God. Only hurry up, and may he have a horse to ride back." She pushed her advantage a bit further. "But certainly, give him a horse." "Give him his horse," the coronel shouted, waving dismissal. The aide went out to authorize Georgie's departure. "You had better vamoose, my son," he advised, "before the coronel changes his mind. It's a good thing you returned that roan horse." And it was a matter of very few moments before they clattered with indecent speed out of the plaza and away up the road. The vaquero sprang from the roadside when they had gone barely half a mile, and the three of them galloped briskly away and over a hill towards El Escondido. Chapter 19 Confession. Raquel and Georgie had been back for 2 days. Already some of the peons who had fled El Escondido on the night of the raid were straggling in from the hills. They told of the exciting speeches and fine promises made by Manuel, who had also said that El Escondido would be confiscated or destroyed by the government. But they had learned that he was nothing but puro bandido, not a true revolutionista at all. Upon the discovery of his perfidy, they had all come back, with one exception, to support their padrón. So the work of the ranch was gradually resumed, and to Raquel fell the delightful task of riding over the hidden range to inspect her cattle. If she could only get them out of the country, she would accomplish her mission after all. It only remained to wait for an opportunity. Lois went everywhere with Raquel. She had recovered her strength. When Raquel had crept upstairs to the little balcony on the night of her return with Georgie, she had found Lois sitting by her window, dressed and waiting. "Raquel," Lois had leaped up joyfully. "Oh, I'm so glad you're back. You found Georgie." "I can see it in your face." "Yes, he's downstairs," Raquel smiled. "I hope you and Don Nestor weren't too worried over my absence." "We got back as soon as we could." "Oh, my dear, you must be exhausted. Let me help you into a fresh gown." "Do lie down, and I will have Conca bring you something to eat. She's had chicken soup ready for hours, and tamales." Lois was busy making Raquel comfortable. "Oh, I'm not so tired," Raquel protested. "We slept on the way about 4 hours, at noontime." "But I'm awfully glad you're up, Lois." But Raquel was tired, almost too tired to rest. Finally, she drank a hot potion concocted by Pedad and Don Nestor, and fell asleep. Georgie was already wrapped in noisy slumber, having eaten a preposterous meal to Pedad's rapture. When Raquel woke at noon, the next day Lois was sitting beside her. From then on, she was rarely far from Raquel's side. At first, it seemed strange to Raquel to have a girl companion constantly with her. At times, it brought school days sharply back. "How different this all is," Lois said the next morning as she watched Raquel dress. "I never thought I could like it down here, but do you know, Raquel, I love it. I've been thinking lately, somehow I've been different. It's been different with me, Raquel, since that ride we had over the desert. You've been so wonderful. I don't see how I could ever have been so hateful to you. It seems as if it were another person." "Well, I guess perhaps I'm a bit different now, too," Raquel offered awkwardly. "You see, Raquel," Lois went on desperately, "I hated you before I ever saw you." Jimmy Hovey always wrote such wonderful things about you and held you up to me, and I couldn't bear it. Jimmy had always made a pet of me, and I just adored him. But he teased me too, and told me my faults. I guess I always had my own way with Papa, but Jimmy would not give in to me. And that used to make me so angry. I can remember crying with rage. And then Jimmy would just walk away and wouldn't pay any attention to me. And I'd have to be the one to give in. I just hated it. But I always did give in because I was so crazy about Jimmy. And I wanted him to like me and to admire me. When I grew older and went to the towers, I suppose it was just because I couldn't wind Jimmy round my finger that I cared so much for his opinion. Of course, I know, it did me a lot of good his trying to discipline me. I got a little practice in letting someone else have his own way. But Jimmy shouldn't have teased me so. He should have seen how cruel it was. And when he praised you, it made me hate you. Then, when you came to school, it seemed as if here was one way I could get the better of Jimmy. He couldn't make me like you if I didn't want to. It was horrid and hateful, I know. Oh, Raquel, can you ever forgive me? I spoiled your school, your only school. Lois repeated the last words anxiously. Raquel had scarcely spoken during her confession. It's all right, Lois, she said at last with some difficulty. It was hard for her to understand the complicated psychology of Lois. Experience. I guess I was hateful to you, too, when you wanted to speak to me there once or twice. And I never told Jimmy a word about your being in the West. That was pretty bad, you know, because he might have missed you, for all I knew. But Raquel, he is still there, isn't he? And we shall see him when we do get back. I'll tell him just what I did, because it's only right he should know. And Raquel, I'll tell you something else. I met your brother. Yes, I know that, Raquel grinned. What he told you? When he came up to the ranch for Christmas, he described you. You were looking at a shawl, which he promptly bought for my mother. Just because you were looking at it, I guess. Lois blushed. And we met him by chance driving home from a ranch Christmas afternoon. The driver lost the road, and Custer, you're your brother, got out and drove in our car and showed us the way. I didn't know it was he, of course. I didn't know who it was. But I was just crazy about him. I am yet. Only when I learned his name, I didn't know how to act. So, as usual, I was horrid again. And I wouldn't have done it for anything if I could have helped it. Lois began to cry, her face puckered up like a baby's. Raquel laughed outright. Stop, silly. What do you care? It will do old Custer good. He's so spoiled by the girls, because he's so handsome and has such a way with him, that it will just do him good to have a girl a little offish with him. It'll make him all the more eager, you'll see. Besides, he's been perfectly crazy about you ever since he saw that picture of you when you were only 12 years old. I was dying to tell you that when I saw you at the towers. But of course you wouldn't have cared then anyway. Oh, Raquel, is he? Lois looked delighted. Of course, if it had been anybody but your brother, I wouldn't have felt guilty and wouldn't have acted that way. Oh, I'll have to get back if only to apologize to Custer. Now wouldn't that make you tired? Apologize, laughed Raquel. Custer fussin' even Lois. Don't you do anything of the kind, or I shan't ever speak to you again, or take you home to Lowe's Ranchos with me. Lois looked at Raquel with her heart in her eyes. You're going to take me home with you. Why, of course, silly, for as long as you can stand us rough old cow ranchers. And I'm going to ask Anne out, too. Your little friend grows surprisingly beautiful, approved Don Nestor, taking his sun bath with the birds in the patio. She was a washed-out little thing for the first week or so. But now she is like the lovely golden-haired ladies of Castile, as indeed she was, in a gown from the inexhaustible treasure chests. Lois, magnetic charm began to reassert itself with returning health and spirits. She was shortly ordering everybody around with her broken Spanish and her pretty ways, and everyone rushed about desperately to please La Loisa. The fat Peded was at her feet, Conca lolled at her elbow, and old Moso was throwing sheep's eyes all the time. Even Raquel found it hard not to do what Lois wanted, and was constantly contriving to do things to please her. And Lois herself was full of services these days. The house bloomed with flowers of her plucking, and she managed to amuse Don Nestor greatly with her pantomiming. With Raquel she was eager, striving. An impression had been made upon her, which she was never to forget. She hardened herself to long rides over the hills. She learned to saddle and unsaddle her own horse. But I can't lift a saddle, Raquel. Lois had been horror-struck at the idea, yet, nevertheless, she soon was proud of her skill and called everyone out for an exhibition. She learned to find water when she was thirsty, if there was any about, to make flapjacks, coffee, even tortillas. The fragile chest, the slender shoulders began to fill out. Raquel took her into the hills and made her lie down in the sun till her delicate skin was red. The slight cough, the fatigue which Lois had always felt, soon began to disappear. "Do you know," she said, "I haven't had an ache in my back or chest in weeks now. I just noticed yesterday that it never hurts anymore." "Why, did you always have pain, Lois?" Raquel asked. "Most of the time, especially in winter, and all the time after Daddy died. One day they had ridden far. They were warm and flushed. Raquel found a shower bath in the hills, a natural warm and cold shower. A mountain stream had divided in its course, one streamlet flowing over hot rocks, the other in the deep shade of the canyon. Both streams tumbled in a pretty waterfall over into the same pool. Here the two girls splashed and played, moiling up the crystal pool and drying themselves in the sun. "It is the most fun I ever had in my life, Raquel." "How I shall miss it," Lois sighed. But it was their last frolic at El Escondido. When they returned to the hacienda at sundown, Georgie rushed out to greet them with the news that Conca's novio was back. He had left the army. The railroad had begun to operate that day, and the way was clear to return home. Raquel hurried in for a conference with Don Nestor. One of the vaqueros was dispatched to Nacazari with a letter to Mrs. Daniels and a telegram to be sent if the wires were up once more. The vaquero who had first brought news from Georgie had proved an able cowboy and a faithful retainer, so Don Nestor suggested that he be put in charge of an outfit of men and 1,000 head of cattle, to start at once on the long overland drive to the border. "It's a long way," said Don Nestor, "but they will get there some time, and if the railroad will ship more for us we shall see." "Ah, Raquel, so my little mayordomo is leaving me. I shall be lonely till you will come again. But I shall come back surely some time, Don Nestor," Raquel promised. "Indeed, I shall when the war is over, and Dad and the boys come back." "My house is yours," Don Nestor bowed low as he repeated the old Castilian saying, "always. And all I have I leave to you when I am no more. When you go, I should like you to take with you the chest of jewels and gowns. But the lands are to return to the people, to whom they belong by right," and Raquel knew that he meant it. On a fair morning, when the land seemed to swoon of its own loveliness, and the perfume of clematis and honeysuckle penetrated even to the high balcony of Raquel's room. She woke with the realization that this was to be her last awakening at El Escondido. "Lois," she called across the corridor. "Lois, are you up?" "Oh, I hate to go." "That is, I would hate to if it weren't for Mom. I must be shameless, lazing away my time here in Mexico for 2 months." Chapter 20, Home with the Herd. The puffing engine that shrieked and roared its way up the grades and shrieked and protested its way down again, as it crawled mile by mile nearer the American border, seemed to Raquel an overworked heart that might stop or burst any minute and tumble them all into the alkali desert. It belched its soot and cinders through the open door of the coach, which swung precariously upon the tail of its coal bin. The occupants were roasted in the heat of its boilers. Huddled among the Mexican refugees, who packed the sole passenger coach which the laboring train drew through the desert, sat Raquel in her peon costume and Georgie. Between them was a fair-faced Senorita Lois, who clutched her black serape tightly under her chin. Like all the other women, she never removed it in spite of the heat. Like the other girls and women, too, she was nervous with apprehension. Refugees they were all, Matornistas, Villistas, any ista other than Karansista. They had been waiting for weeks for the train to run again, and for days had been sitting atop the freight cars with their bundles by their sides, fearful lest they be left behind. They were fleeing to the States for safety, taking no chances, placing no confidence in the momentary lull of revolution. "Lucky we got seats inside," said Georgie comfortably. "Gee, I'd hate to be sitting on top of the coach in this sun. Wouldn't you, Lois?" "I bet that's just where we'd be, too, if it hadn't been for Don Nestor's name. Huh, Raquel. I heard the colonel say they were on the lookout for some Americans that the government and the consuls had been pesterin' them about, ever since the telegraph wires had been mended again. Huh. But he had no intention of letting 'em through so easy. Let 'em wait, he said. It was easier not to know anything about them. But the cattle, sure, they'd carry them up all right. That meant bringing American gold into the country. Mexico for the Mexicans. So here we are, with 1,000 longhorns on behind. Georgie, hush up, can't you? Here, let me pull Lois, skirt over the treasure chest a little more. She would not believe that they were going home until they had actually crossed the border, thought Raquel. They expected to be met at Douglas by the faithful vaquero who had been with them ever since he brought that message of Georgie's to Raquel. With him was Conca's sweetheart. They had gone ahead a week before, driving 1,000 head of cattle. And maybe Jimmy would be there, if the messages got through to Mom. They were to unload this side of the border and drive the cattle across themselves. Paintbrush and Custer's pony, and one of Don Nestor's finest mares for Lois, were in a compartment of their own up in front of the cattle. The feverish day drew at length toward an end. The sun was still high, though Lois' watch said 6 o'clock. They were nearing the line. With a great snorting of brakes and much complaining of wheels, the train from Sonora came to a halt. A lieutenant came, running up from the rear of the coach. The cattle were to disembark, explained the engineer. See, from El Escondido, from Don Nestor Torian, a faithful supporter of the government, a man for the people. Georgie W. Daniels was the first person to touch foot to ground. Raquel swung down next and helped Lois. The cowpunchers were already bringing their horses down the runway. It was amazing how quickly the cattle were unloaded. And here they were, but a scant half-mile from the border, with an hour of daylight still, in which to cross to the United States, where they would drive right into the pens at the train yards. With a great glory of golden dust at their backs, and a noble heralding of mooing and bellowing, with the yell of the punchers, and the shouts of Don Nestor's vaqueros, the three young adventurers crossed that imaginary line in the dust between Mexico and Arizona, which Uncle Sam has drawn with the toe of his boot, and Mexico with her bayonet, while nature has impartially planted the Spanish dagger on both sides. They came like a conquering army, whooping and singing, and never had a landscape seemed more beautiful than that which lay before them. And so it seemed to Jimmy Hovey and Custer Daniels, who had stopped the boiling Pathfinder to stand up and look towards that moving cloud of dust. "It's them, Shore's whiskey cures snake bite," exclaimed Custer softly. "By Jove, it is all right. They've made it," Jimmy was half wild. In a short time, 2 girls were being folded to 2 vastly relieved uniformed breasts. And, in spite of herself, it was Raquel who cried at sight of Custer's empty sleeve. "Just look at that bunch of cattle," she choked, and buried her face in his shoulder. "There's another 1,000 waiting for us in Douglas. It's not the cattle I'm looking at," he was holding her tight, "but the gamest, bravest little old cattlewoman I ever heard of. But, oh, Raquel, why did you do it? Down into such a hornet's nest." "It wasn't worth it, hun. I had to, Custer. Dad asked for more cattle. I had it all arranged to get a bunch just over the border, and along came old A. B. and took them right out from under my nose. What else was I to do but go after more?" Still, she could not look at his empty sleeve. "Was that the bunch of cattle you went after?" Custer grinned. "Well, A. B. never got them over the border even. About 6 miles from the frontiera, they were set on by bandits, and the whole outfit stampeded. Mayers made a great to-do about it, took it up with Washington when he got back. He said the very fellow who had sold it to him and was helping him drive the bunch up turned round and fell in with the thieves. What do you think of that for a skin game? But by golly, I'm glad it happened to him instead of you. Well, it seems that I'm indebted to Mr. Mayers for several good turns after all. I sure haven't lost any money or any cattle this trip, even if quite a lot of sleep has been lost." After a moment, Raquel spoke again, her wet eyes shining. "Custer, I understand you have an apology to make to Lois. You can make it after supper. Me, I want to get to the hotel so I can telegraph Mother Daniels." Down through the pass swept the old car. The earth dropped away from beneath their wheels as though they flew. Below them spread the ranch of the Lazy L, its golden pastures knee-deep in grandma grass and flowers. "There's home, Lois. There's home. What a rich and incredible homecoming." Anne would be there with Bari, who had been sent home from the Argonne with a gassed lung. And where would Anne bring him but to Los Ranchos? Already Bari was breathing easier, Custer said. And there was Mom on the front veranda, waving a tablecloth. Georgie could see her through the field glass glued to his eyes. "I've brung her back, Mom. I've brung her back, and the cattle," he shouted joyfully across the 4 miles between them. "Wait till she can hear you. Wait till she can hear you," they were all shouting now. On the back seat, Custer, with a vast contentment, held Raquel's hard little fist tightly in his good left hand, while his eyes rested adoringly on the blonde head in front of them. Could she ever live up to these Daniels? Lois was thinking. Oh, she wanted them to like her, to be worth the liking. How right Jimmy had been about Raquel. Only he hadn't said half enough. And Jimmy smiled back understandingly as, singing and calling out, They swept down nearer and nearer to those clustering creamy walls, lying so golden in the afternoon sun, to that waving banner welcoming them home.